I've become obsessed with Sifu recently. The discipline, patience, and control you must have while playing, it reminded me of something I've long forgotten about from childhood. Kung Fu. As a child, I remember watching a ton of old Kung Fu flicks and indulging in Kung Fu media. From 36 Chambers of Shaolin to the 5 Deadly Venoms, even comedies like Kung Fu Hustle, to inspired media from the likes of WU-TANG Clan, Afro Samurai, or even the Boondocks, which had Kung Fu elements inside of it even though it had nothing to do with it. It's something about Kung Fu that had me hooked, and I just need to talk a little bit about it. So what was it about Kung Fu that I enjoyed so much? The simple answer is I was broke as a joke growing up, and these old Kung Fu movies were mad cheap on DVD. They also played them on certain channels since I didn't have any cable. When watching these old Kung Fu flicks, the main character was always overwhelmed by some uncontrollable force to which he trained his body and mind to come back and defeat this foe, a bit like Sifu. As soon as I started playing Sifu, I was hooked. It's a classic revenge story. The player character's father was killed by a previous student named Yang alongside his gang. After killing your father, this gang turns to you and your neck gets slit as well. You end up surviving, and after many years of training, you're off to get your revenge. The combat of Sifu is spot on with the feeling you get when watching old Kung Fu media, with the timing of blocks and parries, the combos that can be performed, and control of knowing when to use certain attacks. Visually and mechanically, it really understands that feeling of watching the choreography in old Kung Fu movies. It even has some references in the game that call back to some of these movies I'm talking about. For example, the hallway scene from Oldboy. It's just a great addition. Continuing with the story of Sifu, you eventually track down each person from the main villain's gang and murder them all, including the main villain himself, completing this revenge story. Until a cutscene plays, showing the young player character walking up to 2 graves, one of his father's and the other his own, with Sifu, the player's father, telling Yang, the main villain, that he's unworthy and to leave. But the way I interpret this scene is Sifu actually talking to you, the player character, telling you that you're unworthy for using Kung Fu as a means of mindless revenge. You're then put back into the beginning of the game with 2 choices: ending the game here or continue through the game again, and instead of murdering each member of Yang's old gang, you instead show them mercy. On this second playthrough, the game was much easier due to knowing more abilities and knowing how to do different combos properly. But even with knowing how to use Kung Fu properly and having more power, instead of taking revenge, you instead show compassion and spare this gang. This sounds to me like another old Kung Fu movie I used to watch. Kung Fu Hustle was a comedy movie overall, but at the end of the movie, the main character gains overwhelming power in order to kill the main villain. But instead of killing him, he shows the same compassion and spares the villain's life, even offering to teach him the Kung Fu that he learned himself. Maybe this is what I enjoyed about these old Kung Fu movies. The compassion they sometimes show instead of using their power to destroy their enemies completely. No, I don't think this is quite the reason either. Yes, there were a couple of these movies that may have shown compassion once in a while, but for the most part, these movies were more about the characters starting from nothing and rising up through the knowledge and training in the art of Kung Fu. Let's talk a little bit about 36 Chambers of Shaolin and Liu Yu's development through the story. Yu's village is massacred by the oppressive Manchu government. Yu then barely escapes to a Shaolin temple and trains in Kung Fu as a Shaolin monk. And this is where the real story begins. Yu then trains through all 35 chambers and masters Kung Fu as a Santee, which from my understanding is just another word for monk. But this movie encapsulates training the mind and body above all else. Even at the end of the movie, when the final fight happens, it's not really glorified or anything. It's a quick win for Yu, and it pretty much gets glossed over, showing that this movie is more about the training itself. I think this movie stuck with me so much as a child because it conveyed the message that through discipline of the mind and having a strong sense of perseverance, you can get through most hardships that get thrown your way. And growing up with a bunch of uncontrollable factors, seeing that someone is able to get through major hardships through discipline was essential, even if it was just a Kung Fu movie. This bled into other forms of popular media I used to watch and listen to growing up.
Everybody was Kung Fu fighting.
From the music of Wu-Tang Clan or other older movies I used to watch like Black Dynamite, and honestly most other blaxploitation films that came out during this era, if it had some type of Kung Fu in it, I was usually hooked to the screen. Even cartoons that didn't have anything to do with Kung Fu had elements of it inside. Take the Boondocks for example. Anytime a fight scene would happen, out of nowhere, boom, it turned into a Kung Fu movie, and it blended so well together. Or shit like Samurai Jack, which eventually led into my enjoyment of anime. Wait a minute, maybe Adult Swim is the reason I like this shit so much. So what is it about Kung Fu that I like so much? To me, Kung Fu is more than just violence. It's philosophical. It's a physical form of being able to better yourself as a person through discipline of the mind and training of the body. It's having self-control. Like I said in the beginning, growing up I was broke as a joke and I could have easily went down a totally different path than I did. But instead I was able to have self-control and decide instead to do something better with my life. So I think this is the reason I enjoy Kung Fu media so much. It shows to be patient and disciplined. And maybe because the fighting scenes are pretty cool too.
This is what it is, okay? I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.